Hey there, this is my third lesson on the topic of modal interchange. And there's a lot of stuff to cover today, so I'm just going to get right into it. I want to talk about two different chords, the II7 and sharp 4 minor 7 flat 5. They're kind of similar, so they have the same kind of function. And I'll show you some examples of common chord progressions and tunes that you'll find these chords, and I'll try to make the argument that it's a modal interchange rather than a dominant chord. We'll see what you think. So if we are in C major, the first chord is C major, the second chord is a D minor 7, right? If we turn that chord into a D7, we get a different sound, obviously. So you often hear this chord progression, right? So C major 7, D7, D minor 7, G, C with some kind of turnaround. Okay, so then this D7 would be a II7 chord. And now some of you are thinking, hang on, that's not a secondary, or that's not a modal interchange. It is a secondary dominant, the dominant of the dominant, and that is true. But it has a different quality to it, in my opinion, and some of the teachers that I've had in the past. Doesn't necessarily sound like the other secondary dominants. So remember that I said in my previous lesson on modal interchange that modal interchange is when you take, if you're in C major and you take a chord from C minor, you're borrowing from the parallel minor, that's modal interchange. But I left a little caveat there that there are other chords that I think is also in the modal interchange category, because they're not necessarily secondary dominants. Okay, so let's just actually back up a little bit. When you're in the key, let's say you're in the key of C major, and if you find a chord that does not belong to this key, meaning like it's not one of the harmonized, it could be different reasons why this chord is there. It could be secondary dominant, right? It could also be modal interchange, or sometimes there is no theory explanation why a chord is there. It just sounds good. Even in pop tunes, sometimes you'll find a chord that just sounds good, but it's very hard to find a functional explanation for it. It could also be a key change, like a temporarily key change. So modal interchange, it's not just chords from the parallel minor. There are also other chords that have the same kind of function as modal interchange, in my opinion. I'll try to show you why this chord doesn't sound like a dominant every time, right? So let's say I'm in C major and there's an A7. Like undoubtedly it sounds like it wants to go to D. Doesn't have to go to D, but it sounds like it wants to go to D. But if I play a C major, it doesn't necessarily want to go to G. It kind of wants to, but it doesn't have to. A lot of times in pop music, you'll hear this chord progression, for example, C, D, F, C, or even C, F minor. So is it a secondary dominant there? I don't know. Could even be in the minor key. C minor, D7, F minor. right? Another example would be, let's say we play Silent Night. So apologies for the Christmas spirit. You know, and then it goes to C, back to C, right? So that again, there it doesn't sound like a dominant function. Obviously, if it's a flat 7, it's a dominant chord, but it doesn't necessarily have a dominant function, meaning that it pulls towards another another chord. You could rest on that chord, right? Okay, so that's my little demonstration. Sorry for the Christmas song. To show you that it's kind of a different thing than a dominant. So let's get into a tune. Take the A train. Okay, so I'm gonna make a little loop here. D7, D minor, G. So here it's a secondary dominant, but it could also be treated as something else. So the chords would be C major for the first chord, Ionian, right? Then maybe mixo, Dorian, mixo. The thing is, the melody is this, right? So it's that G sharp. So if we add a G sharp into the mix, we would get D Lydian flat 7. That's what I call that scale. So it would sound like this. Very common thing to do, right? So we can throw that note in when we're copying as well. You want to be a little bit careful with that though, because if you do it too much, it's kind of you're forcing the soloist to play that note, but you don't have to. You could play a regular mixo. Same thing with the soloing. You don't have to play that note every time. It's a little bit too much. It is a very interesting note. It's interesting to note also that it's the same note as the C major bop scale. That note has a funny relationship to that key. Some people even suggest a whole tone sound there, so let's try it. You could also play the bop scale, Mixolydian bop scale there, right? if you don't know your bob scales, I have previous lessons on that stuff as well. And there is plenty of tutorials on the topic of bob scales. Let's move on actually to another chord progression that is very common, or not as common perhaps, but it's this tune on Green Dolphin Street. C major, E flat major 7, D7, D flat. So it's a C major 7 chord to E flat major 7 chord, D7. Some books say, some charts say D major 7 there. Sounds better with the D7, I think. There it is, this II7 chord. D flat major 7, which I covered in the previous lesson on modal interchange, which is flat 2 major 7. So it's kind of like a bossa nova. The A section has a Latin feel to it. So the obvious thing would be to just kind of play arpeggios, right? Just try to move them around following this chord progression. Right? But as I have mentioned in my previous lessons, that could be great, but it could also be a little bit, you get kind of stuck in that mode of playing something and shifting it and following kind of the harmony in a way that is not opening up possibilities in the way you might want. So you could do as I did in previous lessons, which they actually do in this tune a lot, which is to turn it into a C pedal. And then more of a triadic approach, so C over C to E flat over C, which gives you a C minor 7. D over C, which is a C7, a D7 chord. D flat over C. Right, so I'll make that vamp a little bit slower actually. Now I can think of everything from the root, right? From C, so there would be C major to C minor. To Mixo, Lydian, and then Phrygian. So C major, C minor, C Lydian, and C Phrygian. Okay, let's actually try to think like that over the chord progression I played before. So it just gives you a different approach to think. I find myself I'm thinking differently rather than just playing. You know, this tune is actually in E flat, right? I know we shouldn't play it in C. I don't know why we played in C. It's supposed to be in E flat. I mean, you could play it in any key, but that's the key that horn players play it in. For some reason, it ended up in the real book in C, I think, and then people played in C. But hey, next modal interchange chord is sharp 4 minor 7 flat 5. So if we're in C, the 4 chord is F major 7. If I just move the bass note up one step, I get F sharp minor 7 flat 5, which again is kind of borrowing from C Lydian. Going back to our lovely Christmas tune, this could be F sharp minor 7 flat 5. So those chords are kind of related, the D7 and F sharp minor 7 flat 5. I mean, F sharp minor 7 flat 5. Just put a D in the bass. Right? The most common thing is to hear this progression, right? Like in Night and Day. Lots of tunes have that chord progression. It can be very tricky. So let's look at it. I'll make a loop again. So first thing first, let's just try arpeggios. See how that goes. So that's, if you can't do that, you should practice that because it's kind of necessary. But again, it's like if we do that all the time, it's gonna be very, it's not opening up much. A lot of people find this chord progression tricky because, especially if it's fast, right? There are many variations on this chord. It could be a F sharp minor 7 flat 5 to F major, or F minor 6 to C over E, E flat major. The most common, I think, is the ones that we're playing here. So what you can do is you can ignore the fact that these chords have notes outside of the key of C major. Because if you think about it, it's just one note different, right? F major. So if we play C major, there's just one note that is off. So chances are that it's not going to sound that bad. Because the audience hear C major. That's the home key, right? So I'm going to be a little bit bold here and try to play just C major over the whole thing. I'm just going to ignore the fact that there's an F minor 7 there and there's an E flat diminished. I'm just going to play C major. Maybe it'll suck. We'll see. so it's not too bad. Obviously, you don't want to do this because you're lazy. You want to practice the arpeggios so that you can do both and mix it up. Next thing would to be the same thing, but try to think of which notes are actually working. So for the first chord, every note in C major except maybe the F works, right? The next chord, there is not a hold as the C, the G. You have to be a little more careful with the minor, right? So the next thing would to be to do the same thing that I just did, but try to avoid the notes that are not, that doesn't work on that chord, if you know what I mean. That takes a little bit of a thinking, and it's a good thing to kind of train your ears to find those notes, right? So I'll try that and we'll see how that goes. Here I'm safe, right? C major. And then maybe mix it up with arpeggios. There are some melodies, right, that work over this. So to prove my point that you can play C major or what's that called? Everything Happens to Me. And then maybe arpeggios. So ultimately you want to be able to mix playing the scales that do fit over each and one of those chords, but not being locked into that, because there's this misunderstanding or amongst beginner improvisers. So when you get used to this stuff, that you think that you have to play every key change, but that's not what you're doing when you're playing. You want to be aware of the key changes, but you don't have to play every. That's too much. If you're playing every chord, every note that belongs to every chord, that's too much. So, but on the other hand, you don't want to be lazy, and if a teacher tells you, well, you can play just C, you'll be like, oh, I don't have to practice the minor 7 flat 5 arpeggios or what have you. That's not a, you want to find a happy medium there. I find that a lot of students, guitar students, the minor 7 flat 5 arpeggios, it's often kind of weak. So you want to work on your minor 7 flat 5 arpeggios. Another thing is you can think of kind of like C major, C minor, the modal interchange approach. C major, C kind of blues. So for the first chord I'm playing C major, the next chord I'm playing C minor, back to C major, and then the blues kind of scale. See how that sounds? So minor, major, C major, minor. So I don't want to get into the diminished too much. I have a previous lesson on diminished chords, and it's a whole topic in and of itself. But when the chord shows up like that on the flat 3 degree, you can always treat it as kind of a blues. It's a kind of a neat trick. So I'll leave you with that. And so we talked about the 2 chord II7 chord, and the sharp 4 minor 7 flat 5. And some tunes we looked at was what's that tune? We've Take the A Train, and then On Green Dolphin Street, and then the last tune we looked at was Night and Day, which I've talked about in the first modal interchange lesson. So I hope you get some ideas out of this, and see you next time.